Welcome to our second lecture in this colloquium series. Today, our guest is Dr. Hanan Hammad, who is a professor at the University of Houston. I'll read her biography shortly. And she will be giving a talk titled Labor of Love, the Poor First Son of Bitches, or Sons of Bitches? Egyptian History from Below. And some of you who are part of the colloquium or following up with us, we've read from her deeply engaging book, Industrial Sexuality, a book on the labor centered around the Mahalla textile complex in Egypt, one of the biggest modern industrial complexes in Egypt, that was started in the 19th century with the development of the cotton industry and textile industry in Egypt. But my memory of Mahalla, Hanan, is as a boy in Libya reading the Egyptian children's or other Egyptian magazines. Mm-hmm. The Mahalla football team was an important football team at the time. The factory had a football team that played among the other ones. I don't think they are that significant, partly because I don't know whether that's true or not, but partly because the Mahalla government-owned industrial complex has become a smaller part of the Egyptian economy, and so the football team has shrunk in its ranking. But
the last fan left.
They left.
I'm the last fan left of Ghazal.
Oh, really? Okay. The other aspect is, but Mahalla remained as a center of labor activism, because I think I remember they had a role in the beginning of the Egyptian revolution, or even thereafter. The strikers from the al-Mahalla complex were always a kind of spark for agitation and for the rights of the working people and the underclasses of Egypt. So that's my little take on the issue, but I'll read your biography and get you started, because we're anxious to and anxiously awaiting with joy your presentation. Dr. Hanan Hammad is the Arab American Education Foundation Chair in Modern Arab History and Director of the AAEF Center of Arab Studies at the University of Houston. AAEF is Arab American something foundation, which is nice to have. Born and raised in Egypt, Hammad studied mass communications and journalism at Cairo University and worked as a journalist for several years. She received an MA in Middle East Studies and a PhD in History and Persian Studies from the University of Texas in Austin in 2004 and 2009, respectively. Hammad's research received support from Fulbright Hayes, Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Sciences, the Fritz Thyssen Foundation, and the Wissenschaft College zu Berlin, Germany, Wolf Institute at Cambridge University, and the Crown Center of Middle East Studies at Brandeis University, among others. She's a highly decorated and highly sought after scholar. Her books and articles and research received recognition and won prizes from the National Women's Studies Association, the Association of Middle East Women's Studies, MESA, the Arab American Book Awards, and the Journal of Social History, among others. And as I said, she is the author of the book Industrial Sexuality. And she's also written on the great Egyptian singer Leila Mourad. Wonderful social historian, if you will, that we're very honored to have today. So, Dr. Hammad, welcome. And we'll give you, we're a small group, so we'll try to give you as loud a reception as possible. And I'm sure our people listening on Zoom or watching on Zoom are also clapping, but we can't hear you. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Matawa. Just before we started, Varsan actually was asking me how long I have known you. And actually, the answer which I plan to share in this presentation, you were the first scholar I met actually when the first day I stepped the foot at University of Houston, University of Texas in Austin. And I went to meet the grad advisor at the time. And the meeting, you were there in her office. The meeting was not very pleasant. And I left the office and you walked with me actually. And your kind words of encouragement and support meant a lot to me. I'm sure you don't recall it because these were your last days actually when you were leaving UT Austin, but it really stays with me and it always reminds me like how important these kind of sort of casual encounters professors have with aspiring scholars or someone who's really reluctant, not sure going to grad school is the right way to do, really can shape their trajectory. So I thank you a lot, even if it's overdue thanking. It's more than 20 years now. Also, I thank you for the invitation to have the opportunity to be in a community with you and your community and your students today. And I'm sure I'm not alone who mourns the thousands of lives of Palestinian students, pupils, scholars, intellectuals who lost their lives with their families, lost their libraries, their schools, their campuses, their books during the genocide by the hands of Israel and funded by the US and with the complicity of many Western and Arab states. So being together actually, I think could be one of the best tools for surviving these dark times. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Warsan, for all the work you put into this event. I really appreciate your patience with me. Before I start, I want to actually explain the title of the talk or part of the title. الفقراء أولا يا ولاد الكلب. So the poor first, son of bitches, actually, is a translation of that outcry that the late Egyptian doctor, activist, revolutionary, and journalist, Dr. Muhammad Abul Ghait, had on his blog while the events of the January Revolution or Tahrir Revolution 2011 unfolded. By May, Dr. Abul Ghait actually captured the reality of the erasure of working class young men and women who participated and contributed to the revolutionary event. Of course, the outcome of the whole revolution is not really flattering, but at the time, at least, Egyptians had strong joy and self-confidence of toppling the Mubarak regime. That outcry actually captures very much what I mean of history from below and how to challenge the erasure of certain classes, certain groups from the historical narratives, and how difficult this to do. Of course, when we talk about history from below, it's not only meant the history of the poor only, but it is the history of ordinary people, people like you, like me, workers, streetwalkers, and not only, or non-elite groups, and not only individuals and groups, but also their engagement in ordinary life that actually shapes the historical processes in a way that could be invisible. However, their engagement actually, I argue that shapes the historical movement, even if it is missed before, but definitely contributes to landmark events. So I want to give credit to Dr. Abul Ghar, rest in peace. Unfortunately, we lost him due to terminal illness a few years ago. When we talk about history from below or history of the ordinary people, we counter a big set of challenges. Challenges of sources and challenges of method. And I'm talking today from, or in the limit of my experience as a social historian of the Arab world, and also of Egypt particularly. These challenges could overlap with experiences of other scholars in other area studies. However, it's not necessarily to be identical. Probably the first challenge actually for having an access to sources is for those who are based on the West is to have fund and time to go spend time in the region. And then they have to go through like more and more getting difficult, even close to impossible, access to get a security permit. I call them actually security barriers to access the archive. If you use the state archive, of course, in other states like Lebanon archives, actually there is no much central archives, but you need also strong social network to be able to access communal and individual archives. Something about the sources of the ordinary people in ordinary daily life is relate to that these sources most probably were not produced by those individuals and groups and communities themselves. Talking about literacy that has high rate. And also ordinary people, if we are talking about working classes, most often they don't afford time and also papers and pens to reflect and produce their own sources. Most sources are produced on them, like the case of Egypt, mostly by the state or mediated by the state. And when the state produces these sources and preserve it, it's not the purpose is to write their history or to keep their voice. The point is to serve the state bureaucracy purposes. And that always put us on methodological challenge, how to use these sources to construct the experience of individuals and groups so that they didn't produce them. And also how to remind ourselves all the time that we are trying to construct their experiences in their own merit rather than speaking on their behalf. Sometimes also it is easy to slip into the question of like, who cares? Like the story of an individual or a small group or a small community away from the power center, who cares and why it matters? So the methodological challenge always how to prove or to use or employ these individual or small or micro experiences, not only to write micro history, but also to tell a larger story on like national or regional level. What I'm going to do in my talk today is to give a few case studies from my own work, probably two, and Dr. Mutawa, feel free to actually stop me at any time you feel like I go over my time. I can talk more or less, but just to open the discussion, which I really look forward to. So the first case I want to give is like relate to how history from below actually contradict the meta-nationalist narrative that people of power would like, and even the majority of people bought into and kind of sort of blindly repeat. While strolling in Old Cairo last April, President of Egypt, General Abdel Fattah Sisi, told his guest, French President Emmanuel Macron, "I was born here and lived among Jews, British, and Armenians." A simple timeline reveals how that statement was inaccurate and incorrect, as President Sisi was born in November 1954 after the departure of the British and the flight of many foreign communities and on the verge of the Jewish exodus. As a product of contemporary mass-mediated popular culture, President Sisi was cashing what he thought a sociocultural capital by claiming his upbringing as part of cosmopolitan Egyptian heritage to impress his French guest. The history of foreign communities in colonial and semi-colonial Egypt, or pre-1952, emerged as a field of inquiry in both Egyptian and Western historiographies since 1980s, with the intensification of many crises that Egypt experienced in 1990s due to, and in 2000 until the Tahrir Revolution, due to the IMF recipes, neoliberal economy, the increasing political repression and the rise of radical Islamism, etc., we find actually an intensive nostalgia to reconstruct the history of Egypt pre-52. And the time that what they call it is Zaman al-Gamil. It started first with the leftist and Nasserist who coined that term, Zaman al-Gamil, or old good days, to express their nostalgia to the 1950s and 60s under Nasser. For them, this period was the peak of social justice, creative art, and literature. No need for much research to know that many of those leftists lingered in Nasser's prisons under torture for years. Quickly, Zaman al-Gamil became a generic term that many used to refer to the monarchy and pre-1952 period. Pseudo-intellectuals and pseudo-liberals took it to the middle-brow culture. Newsstands and TV screens were flooded with narratives about the glorious colonial times when Egyptian society was highly civil, tolerant, and cosmopolitan. Imagined history of multiculturalism in which Egyptians, Europeans, and Jews lived together. Some of the most important products of that narrative is the bestseller novel Yaqubian Building, which made a movie based on, starring Adil Imam. You can see the poster on the screen, by Ala al-Aswani in 2002, and King Pharaoh TV soap opera directed by Hatem Ali, aired in prime time in Ramadan 2007. With the ups and downs of the Tahrir Revolution 2011, the nostalgia to the liberal age, or actually it was, in my view and others, a liberal cage, intensified among the Egyptian publics. Self-fashioned liberal activists took it to the social media to disseminate their nostalgia to the glorious past, and the majority of Egyptians of that period never lived. Interestingly, those activists, those social media pseudo-liberal activists, used and abused women's bodies images as iconic images for their imagined progressive past, and to lament the present time declining, or to express their hopes that new Egypt would recover what has been lost in the Egyptian society due to Islamist and petrodollar contamination. This is the image of images of European-looking women in bathing suits on beaches are their evidence for the lost respectable society in which women never had to deal with sexual harassment or resort to hijab and body cover. With simple digital editing and social media platforms, the Egyptian public participated in a flourished industry that I called manufacturing glorious past and belittling the present. Nostalgia was politicized and weaponized by anti-Muslim Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi. Actually, somewhere else, I show that how, or I trace sexual harassment as a phenomena in the Egyptian street going back to 19th century. But here is some like a sample of what those pseudo intellectuals are doing, like juxtaposing past and present, what they thought the past was perfect and the present was actually embarrassing. For them, this is glorious pre-52 time, while actually these are the embarrassing time. I don't want to spend much time, but from my view, actually, these are the progressive time when thousands and even millions of Egyptian women cross classes managed to go to higher education, even if regardless we like or we dislike the way they dressed. And another image that's actually more untasteful, that image in particular. Here, actually, they show the wife of President Mohammed Morsi, Nagla Mahmoud, as an ordinary hijabi woman, and juxtapose it with Queen Nazli, the mother of the last king, Farouk, and how glorious and elegant she looked. I definitely am the last one could defend Mohammed Morsi. The Muslim Brotherhood regime did not only mistakes, but crimes and contributed to what we face now in Egypt. But the point is how actually they ignore everything that Egyptians were going through under the monarchy, pretending that it was the good old days. Over the last decades, the regime owned production company, broadcasted musalsalat or TV show or soap opera, such as Harat al-Yahud in 2015, Grand Hotel 2016, Layali Ujini 2018, among others. All set in colonial Egypt as a way to fight the Muslim Brotherhood by disseminating a certain narrative about the Egyptian past. These narratives produced a sanitized version of the Egyptian history, saturated with tolerance, elegance, cosmopolitan, multiculturalism, while also free from poverty and the poor. They wrote very much, or these narratives is a history void of Sabha Gad al-Haq and her community. Sabha Gad al-Haq is one of my protagonists, actually, that I met her in the Egyptian court records from interwar period, the period that labeled in the contemporary narrative as elegant and perfect. Tracing her in several cases allows me not only a glimpse into her life, her interaction with her family and the community, including an Italian, a Jew, and a Greek in provincial town away from cosmopolitan Cairo and Alexandria. Her life was far from the velvet images that the Egyptian soap opera or Musalsal and Hotel or Layali Ujini tells us. However, many aspects of her life and the life of her community was, and I claim, much closer to the ordinary life, the real life, the life of the majority of urban population in her time. When I met Sabha Gad al-Haq in the records, she was a streetwalker, a petty thief, a battered wife, and a mother whose notorious criminal record and cruel ex-husband deprived her from embracing her son. She was not a marginalized woman, but she became so by her choice or otherwise through processes of impoverishment of mass Egyptians under the global colonial capitalism. According to one case recorded in 1945, Sabha and two other women went together on a street walking gig. Sex work was already banned in her town, and street walking was never allowed in Egypt, even when sex work was regulated and licensed. Sabha successfully won a customer who agreed to pay her 5 piasters for providing him with the service in dark corner in a narrow alleyway. When the Italian Jewish customer was about to pay her, she tried to snatch his wallet, and he got her arrested. In that case, Sabha was identified as 35 years old and was sentenced with 6 months in jail. At the time, Sabha had already established a hefty criminal record of theft and debauchery or fisq. And she was at the lowest point of her social and professional life. She had been divorced twice. Her first marriage produced a son whom she saw in 1944, helping his father selling sandwiches, beans, and falafel in the street, until that day her 50-year-old ex-husband did not or had not allowed her to see their son. When she saw them and tried to hug the son, the husband, his current wife, and bystander, like a qahwagi or a coffee shop waiter, physically attacked Sabha.
And then, do you have a slide to go with this case?
This is what I'm coming into, actually, because Sabha was away from Cairo. So we hadn't, like, even she didn't have the leverage to appear in the press, like, although her cases actually are kind of sort of juicy and could have attracted the press. She didn't have Facebook accounts, so she didn't post any of her images. But I am imagining her actually to look like those women, urban women or urban working class women at the time. Four years before that incident, she was caught in a petty theft business. Though supposedly a handloom weaver, her 19-year-old second husband was a gangster who headed a band of thieves that included Sabha and his other wife. Police caught both wives in October 1940, carrying brooms stolen from a Greek grocer, though the grocer himself hadn't reported the case. Between February and September 1940, she succeeded in recruiting 4 young girls for unlicensed prostitution and taught them to meet unknown men for sexual services. The court convicted her for moral corruption and are urging the 4 minors to commit debauchery or fornication, fisq, and fujur. In 1941, her criminal record grew longer with 2 more theft and conviction for committing adultery and other types of cases. Buried in archival records that actually having access to these records now is getting close to impossible due to security barriers. The story of Sabha and her girlfriends, husband, co-wives, and foreign neighbors captured what I would like to talk with you about history from below, or social history from below. History of the majority of people, the history of non-elite that has many different edges and intersectionality, including gender, class, provincial location, and in the time of making Egyptian urban polity and legal and moral regimes. So why at the case of Sabha, or these many cases of Sabha, that I consider myself actually kind of lucky I wasn't after Sabha when I was in the archive. I was trying to use my time in the archive as economic as possible. And after 1 year of archival research in Egypt, when I was seeing my notes, actually, Sabha, her name struck me in several cases. I don't really know that if there was many other women that happened to be documented in court records, but the way I was managing my time actually escaped. But again, I really think that I'm still lucky to meet Sabha and to manage to glean her story from fragmented records and notes. And my question now is why actually her life mattered or why her experience mattered. Although for some of us would argue that she's the margin, but actually she lived not in the margin. Her community was not the margin. And it's still her story actually can establish a larger story about gender and sexuality and urban life in Egypt during what the contemporary social media activists and president tried to tell us was glorious time. Sabha's body and how her customers, Egyptian and foreign neighbors, ex-husband, and the legal system treated it complicated our understanding of the entangled and contradicting processes of defining sexuality and public morality. We don't know why Sabha was divorced, but as a divorced mother with repetition of engaging commercial sex, the father of her son did not allow her to spend any time with their child. And obviously the community agreed. When she wanted to hug the child, the father, the stepmother, and other bystanders imposed the father's cruel wish through physical abusing Sabha, stripping her naked in public and beating her on her genitalia, which is actually the ultimate form of sexual humiliation. I worked somewhere else about obscenity and how it could be gendered or not gendered in modern history of Egypt. And this is one of the cases, if we have time, I would like actually discuss with you today how to glean obscenity as a language, as gestures in public from state-mediated records. The court used the case to establish, or that incident, to establish the rule that women could be convicted with sexually abusing other women and charged the stepmother and the other men with handcraft or the sexual violation, the violation of the sexual honor of Sabha. So that was the case. Actually, usually we always assume that handcraft is for the purpose of not necessarily for the purpose of enjoying sex, but also it is usually cross genders. But here we see the case actually, the court rule actually said women can violate the sexual honor of another woman by stripping them naked in public or touching their genitalia without their consent in public, and of course in private. The same court harshly punished Sabha in other cases because of her hefty criminal record, including incidents of prostitution and encouraging girls for debauchery. To think about Sabha's interactions with foreigners, which is actually take us back to the point I opened this presentation with, nothing shiny to glorify her interaction and experience with her Italian customer or with the Greek grocer. Nothing was cosmopolitan or Mediterranean in their lives. The Italian was receiving sexual service in street from a streetwalker, a strong indication of how low status and the limited financial ability he had. He weaponized the police, of course, the power of the police to protect his wallet, and he was dismissive for any scandalous consequences he could have faced. The Greek and the Italian customers were among more than several hundred individuals lived in the middle of the Egyptian Delta, in that town particularly, and were categorized as foreigners. It's kind of sort of oversimplification because it's a complicated ethnicity and nationality and counting for hierarchy. European colonialism, rather than cosmopolitan polity and sensibility, should explain the entanglement of the lives of Egyptians and non-Egyptians in local ordinary life, forming a complex and shared culture that underpinned by legal system rooted in European colonialism. Are we good with time?
Yes, we're fine.
Excellent. I would move to the second case and really appreciate tolerating me reading the paper. The second case actually is the first part of the title of our presentation today, the love of labor. And I started that research a while ago, and it was published recently. However, the image of some of you might recognize it, Dr. Laila Swaif and her daughters, the sisters of Ala, who is still lingering in prisons, and the heroic sacrifices and the much toll it took in her body from his mother, Dr. Laila Swaif, and also the mental pressure that both sisters have gone through and they still go through, captures what I mean about labor of love. Of course, we are not talking about a working class family, which actually the case I am taking you is about working class, industrial working classes in interwar period. But my purpose is how to conceptualize the activism of women as actually, rather than labor of love, but actually it is activism. In July 1948, the woman labor activist Zainab al-Askari wrote in the leftist periodical Kifah al-Ummah, or Nation's Struggle, the quote that you see on the screen. Finally, for the first time in our history, we witness independent women's movement championing working women's struggles. Al-Askari pointed at the protests of women workers and the wives, sisters, and mothers of the male workers who were detained once the war in Palestine broke out in summer 1948. Protesting women demanded the release of their men, visitation to the detainees, and financial support for their families until their release. Bourgeois feminist organizations like the Huda Sha'rawi model. She was not at the time, but it's her offspring, sort of. Lacking affinity with the working class, did not effectively respond to the woman laborers' call for support. I would give actually an exception to one bourgeois woman. I'm sorry, the writing in Arabic. Her name is Fatima Na'mat Rashid. She was a kind of sort of exception in her care about working class activism and leftist movement broadly. The press under censorship could not report the protest or any labor activism. Nevertheless, working women confirmed their leadership of their movement, as male activists and leaders of many trade unions welcomed representatives of protesting women and publicly supported their demands. Detained workers themselves followed women's leadership and went on hunger strike to pressure authorities to accept their demands. The women's labor movement successfully pressured the government to provide each detained worker's family with 5 Egyptian pounds to help them cover living costs and expenses while their breadwinners were behind bars waiting for trials. Al-Askari represented a clear gendered classed discourses that spoke for experiences, consciousness, and views of drastically different from the upper and middle class women in the feminist movement and the male-dominated labor movement of the interwar period. She wove nationalist, feminist, and working class views together into one agenda that highlighted women in workers' families as leaders on the front line of the labor movement. Scholars of the history of Egyptian working class have overlooked women workers' leadership and their active contribution to Egypt's vibrant labor movement long before the recent noticeable and well-documented contribution of women in movements against Mubarak in 2000 and on. In his pioneering work on the history of the labor movement in Egypt, historian Raouf Abbas reported that he had no information on women's labor activism in Egypt. And this is a cover of his book, actually one of the early books that appeared, academic work on Egyptian labor movement. And his quote, actually striking, is very dismissive for the possibility of women's contribution to the labor activism, and he attributed it to the conservative culture and the small number of industrial workers, women industrial workers. And this kind of sort of actually became the standard false statement that's repeated over and over, even in Western historiography until recently. The quotation that you see, and I'm going to save time not to read it, this quotation from Abbas reflects two recurring challenges in writing labor and women histories: the lack of sources documenting working class activism generally, and the gender biases in interpreting available sources. Both challenges have fortified the false assumption that only men participated in the Egyptian labor activism and that women's movement completely ignored working class struggles. Quickly to talk about the challenge of sources to write more comprehensive for labor movement in Egypt. Not only the sources that's available to the state or in the state's archive, but actually the private collections of individuals and groups has been always systematically confiscated. Most labor activists were leftist, and all labor movement from the view of the state is always suspicious. So arresting activists and confiscating their documents have been systematic. And we know that state security or Amn al-Dawla never really shared any of their archival material with the public. So that actually one of the big challenges. However, now we have a slight change that happened toward the end of Mubarak times. Despite the state's hostility towards labor activism, President Hosni Mubarak's regime and its democratic facade allowed veteran labor and communist activists to collect and publish accounts of their experiences in labor and nationalist movement. So those accounts actually were published in several thick volumes. You see it here. And the importance of these thick volumes, actually, that some of them included pamphlets and posters, in addition to personal accounts. They are mostly men. This is also reflected the gender biases among even generations of leftists and labor activists, male leftists and activists, and the scholars that they actually around them who either volunteer or accepted a commission to edit these volumes. However, with all that, these collections can allow us a good start to rewrite the history of the Egyptian labor movement from the gender lens or through the gender lens. Before I move to that, I would like to share with you a good reason to be always suspicious, not suspicious, but to be careful when we, sorry, I'm going backward. When we approach the state sources, the official state sources, Population census, for example, these are some of the most readily available sources, and it is a very valuable source if you write history about modern Egypt or any modern state. Population census are widely available. It's in print, so even you don't have to go through the hassle of decoding the handwriting of state scribers. However, these sources, we have to be really careful approaching them. It's more like indicative rather than solid information. I give you some examples. 1917 population census actually included 15 women workers in tobacco industry. While actually know from the history of one cigarette factory that there were 37 workers in one factory. The 1947 census also estimated that there were about 1,300 women workers, industrial workers in al-Mahalla, while actually in one factory, the gauze factory, had 2,000 women workers. Beyond these official documents, some surveys actually allowed their state officials to carry on their not only biased discourse, but even misogynist discourse. A survey actually about the living conditions of working classes around Cairo, in a particular village actually that the population fed industrial factories in North Cairo. That survey for the living condition, when it came to discussing women's workers, the state official actually ignored everything in reality he sees, and he wrote down his own misogynist views that women are mentally and physically and intellectually inferior, and they shouldn't work at all, just to stay at home. Ignoring actually the contribution of working women to covering the basic living cost for their poor families. Going back to my point about how can we try or to attempt to rewrite the history of labor activism through the gender lens, and basically to reconceptualize the meaning of activism itself. These sources allows historians to reconstruct women's history in the Egyptian labor movement and reconceptualize proletarization of women and their labor activism. Through these sources, actually, I managed to cite and highlight many incidents of women participating in strikes, labor strikes, or sustaining striking workers using their own gender. Until recently, I don't know how recently, but at the time, seemingly the police was more reserved in physically attacking women. And this is how women actually would manage to smuggle food and other provision to striking workers who occupied the factories. Don't mention that again, that women participated in strikes, and then in some cases they refused to replace their male colleagues, striking male colleagues. In some cases, we find actually married couples, industrial workers, and those wives resisted intimidation and also temptation by factory owners and police. Like if you divorce him or if you convince him to give up, we would give you higher positions, or we would fire you. We find cases actually that women soldiered in and refused the temptation. Even in some cases when women were not working as such, and this is my main point about reconceptualizing activism. When we talk about activism or labor activism, we talk about participation in unionism, labor strikes, sit-in strikes, nationalist struggles, etc. But we can sort of, it is really important for workers it's important to consider everyday life, how those workers, even if they were male, sustained their movement, and how they escaped police arrest. And here we find the role of women that I would suggest to include in labor activism. It goes beyond labor of love. It's actually labor activism in its own right and its own merit. We find women participating in events against totally what most scholars in Egypt and in the Western historiography suggested, that the conservative social culture was a barrier for women participation in the labor movement. Actually, we see that women employed their gender to participate and contribute to the labor movement. Some of the examples, women participated in meetings to prepare for events or movements while they are wearing Malaya Laf. Let me take you back on the slide here to Malaya Laf instead of saying what Malaya Laf is. Malaya Laf is what the woman here is wearing. It's kind of sort of a sheet almost around like bed sheet side, but it's black and it's made from certain material. And women would cover their body almost head to toe as this way, although they were, in most cases, they would be showing their hands and faces and necks. So women would wear this as a sign of their preservance of working class respectability, urban respectability, and also they didn't want to miss their participation in labor activism. And they would use the same gendered piece of cloth, these sheets actually, to allow their male colleagues to escape the police. In one incident, particularly, a mother of a worker, striking workers, actually would invite the colleague of her son into her room to prepare some kinds of tool to fight the police, to fill bottles with sand, to defend themselves. And actually, she would collect these Malaya Laf or those sheets and allow workers to wear it. And this is how they would manage to escape all police checkpoints to reach their destinations. Mothers and sisters took food and other provisions to their men behind bars. And more importantly, women would encourage, and we have some of the famous cases that although sometimes you find documentation of it, but always escape the male gaze when they go through these accounts. A woman would tell her husband, be a man, keep your dignity, don't testify against your colleagues, and don't worry about us, we are fine. Here we are talking about a woman who hadn't worked actually before jailing her husband, but she would join the labor market to earn living, to support their children, and also to afford sending food to her husband behind bars. Sisters and mothers actually would host meetings of detainee workers in their own houses to organize their movement, how to collect donations, how to publicize their causes. And one of the important incidents is wearing black or women in black march downtown Cairo in 1940s. Excuse me. At some point, there was strong rumors of the outbreak of malaria in bars. And actually, it was not rumors because the country was struggling with cholera. Sorry, not malaria. Was struggling with cholera in 1947. And those women wanted their men to be out so they to save their lives. They didn't know who would perish in horrific conditions behind bars. So they organized actually a procession on the same fashion of funeral. but there was no coffin. Nobody was carrying any coffin. Their weeping, their mourning clothing would make a pedestrian stop them and ask who died, whom we are paying farewell to. So they would explain what they are doing and their situation to publicize their cause and to gain public sympathy. I have another case about the language, and before I started, actually, I would ask Dr. Matawa if the time still allows.
We have maybe 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Thank you. Okay. The language we have in Egypt today, like in many places actually, is kind of product of more recent activities, daily life. So we know that when it comes to the proper language in Egypt, the language that we should use in schools or when we talk to as middle class or upper class or polite, etc., it was actually comes from starting 19th century literature on. And we know that the intellectuals of the time heavily censored the language in a way that sanitized it from certain vocabularies and phrases that were used in working classes. We see that the Egyptian radio that was started in 1930s as state project after the state actually had monopoly over the broadcast 1933, and then the Egyptian TV in 1960, and the state also enjoyed monopoly over TV broadcast for quite a bit until toward the end of 20th century. This language was mostly censored, or it echoes this kind of sort of sanitized middle-class view about the respectable language. And it is the same in dictionaries or collections of Egyptian proverbs, etc. My research question was, how can I find actually the language that working classes use? I'm myself a working class person from a provincial town in Egypt. So that language that I was hearing from the street, it never heard it in Egyptian TV. Of course, there are lots of changes now, but from my upbringing. So I looked at records that's again produced by the state, the court records, and the court records actually does not document everything said in the case. It's mostly, particularly misdemeanor record, or if the case is not high profile, it would actually follow a certain form prepared by the state, and the scriber actually would fill it quickly. But only cases when the language itself is a crime, when a working class person would say something that it is a crime. Someone would sue another person over saying or like cursing him or something. And my research question was this language gendered? Or this like what we can label it as obscene language. I myself, and it could be my biases or otherwise, after I grow up and I kind of sort of not enchanted by my status as becoming a middle class, I start to actually appreciate the expressive power in obscene languages. But the question, were men and women different in using obscene languages? And my findings very much in terms of language, no, because most obscene language or obscene phrases in Egypt would be around cursing, sorry guys, I know, religion, one's parents, and family, and also mentioning genitalia. So there is no difference actually between men and women using this language. However, in terms of stripping one's naked as a way, as weaponizing naked genitalia in a fight, it is highly gendered. I found that men would strip themselves, expose their genitalia as a way to shut up the other side who are fighting against them, particularly if they were women. In the case of women, they would strip one another's naked, as the case I mentioned in Sabha when she was trying to hug her own son. Thank you so much for allowing me to share these case studies, and I truly look forward to our conversation about method and sources and how to come around these challenges to still commit ourselves to social history if this is what we like as a historian or as scholars, if this is what we like to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Hanan, maybe I'll start with from the readings we got from sexual industry and even some of what you refer to. So much, so much of your work is based on cases and a cumulative number of cases. This is the required access to archives, court archives, and so on. How was that experience of accessing those, and where did you know what to look for to find what you found?
Thank you for the excellent question. It's something interesting. Actually, I lived quite a bit complaining about how much humiliation I had to have access to sources. And now I even lamented these good old days that I don't have any access anymore, sort of. That particular archives, not generally. We still try to find ways to work around it. I started with, like every historian in modern Egypt which is Dar al-Wasa'if al-Qawmiyya, or the National Archive. This is like almost all historians start with. It's a very important archive. It's incredibly rich archive. We don't really know what is there because the access to it is very limited. But again, it used to be with all limitation and security permits, etc. It was still more accessible than now. After I exhausted all sources available to me, it has many important units, like the Royal Palace unit, and something important in this collection is the petition files, or the letters that people sent, ordinary people from all walks of life, sent to the Royal Palace or sent to the government. It was very useful, but it didn't I was sure that I was missing a lot. I had read a memoir of a worker who worked or started his work in al-Mahalla, and he became an activist. And this memoir is very unique, actually, in the literature of memoir in Arabic, because, as I mentioned, it is very rare for working class people actually to document their experiences by themselves or to write their memoirs. So all what I saw in that memoir, or I sensed it to happen, was that I couldn't find any sources, and no one knew where the sources is or what are. So my best guessing was police or court records. So I was after this type and I discovered later in the process that they were housed in a different archive. That is Dar al-Mahfuzat. Dar al-Mahfuzat is another national, incredibly rich archive. Now it is becoming to be more known to historians. But the archive initially, I know now they have a reading room or a room for researcher, but it was mostly for people who want to recover their own records for their own purpose. Like you want to have a court case to prove something in your family, or property deed or things like that. But it was very rare for scholars actually to know it or to go to use it. And when I went, and after again a process that I thought I was humiliated, but now I wish to go through the same humiliation but have an access. Was incredible. The court record is just incredible. And court record, it's big part of what this archive has, but also it has, again, like files of state employees in modern time, like in 20th century on. It has property deeds and so many different types of unpublished records that definitely, once researchers have an access to it, can come with very rich narrative of the experience of people who lived in Egypt or had lived in Egypt until today.
Maybe going back to the reading, I'm curious if the book Industrial Sexuality was translated to Arabic.
يا ريت يا رب.
You wish.
I wish. I know there was a publishing house actually bought the right to translate it in Egypt, but the project didn't materialize and they lost the right. But another important publisher actually is in negotiating now with the UT Press to translate it, to buy the right to translate it.
And do you? I mean, the book has a lot of material. Of course, it's the past, but I imagine that it's such a localized past that you expect maybe something would be controversial, that in Egypt there's it's a real accusation to sort of what is it called, advocate for what is it, muddying up the reputation of the nation and so on. That's like a real accusation. And so where might this historical archival work fall in this kind of political, even cultural atmosphere? I don't think it's just the regime that does this. It's also maybe the culture in general might be not so willing to accept this kind of research.
I really appreciate it. I don't want to, the question, and I don't want to say I feel completely that, yeah, it's fine and everything will be perfect. No, I have some concerns around this line. However, away from the headlines of the defeat of January Revolution, for example, and away from big headlines concerning repression, the closed public sphere, etc. When I look at what has been going on in Egypt from the gender lens, I see actually, and also the ordinary life, I see big changes happening, and people are earning their to own their voices in many things. And these, no matter how we can have closed public sphere or level of political repression, the ruling elite to still have to engage with people's voices and the narratives they see. For example, yes, some like actually last year there was a possibility of the state translation project to translate the book, and this is different from the two private publishing houses I just mentioned, and there was a delay for no reason. I didn't I know they had the translation proposal.
المركز الوطني للترجمة.
الله ينور عليك. تمام. So I went and I met the director, a very, very kind, bright person. And their explanation, it's not, we are not rejecting to translate it, but we are concerned because the book is discussing sexual harassment for women workers. And that excuse is so laughable. First, the sexual harassment is not something part of the major changes I'm talking about actually on the ordinary life that's happening in Egypt and people owning their voice, including women, that the case of sexual harassment, it became so uncovered. And like when the first case broke out, I think 2006 or 2008, and the initial response was, it's a new phenomena. It's something that you want to contaminate or pollute the image of the perfect nation and these kind of things. And quickly, all surveys showed that more than 90% of Egyptian women are harassed. And then we have some things in Tahrir Revolution, and President Sisi himself, while he was building his popularity in early his regime, was actually recognizing the issue. And actually quite a bit of legal changes in the right direction happened, like to differentiate sexual harassment from handcraft or sexual assault, etc., which made it easier for women to document to come out to reveal what is happening to them and also seek legal cases. Before, like, women wouldn't say, because the only legal articles was handcraft. So if you want to go to say, so-and-so touched me in public or told me obscene things or whatever, you will be as if you are saying it's I'm sexually violated, which is like has a big stigma. So the excuse was the director of المشروع الترجمة was, for me, laughable. And I told her, actually, by the way, the book is loaded with child molestation in workplaces and private residency. It has also a chapter about sex work. So like sexual harassment of workers, this is a small thing that's in the book, but I realized that the translation will go nowhere. However, going back to my point about the changes that's happening, since actually I had this conversation with the director of the translation project, there was a TV show about child molestation. And it was aired last Ramadan in prime time, and it was huge social conversation about sexual violence children faces in homes. And actually opening this conversation does not label the Egyptian society being experiencing this like particularly. It's a universal issue. And when we face it and we talk about it and we recognize it, it is the beginning actually of containing or protecting our children. So aside that, actually, is a big change in the Egyptian society happening. And another change I would mention, for example, and I actually talked about it in the conclusion of Layla Murad's book, the conversation that happens in the Egyptian society about single motherhood and children born outside the formal marriage. Nowadays, actually, we find a great deal of sympathy with those children and the need to recognize their rights, and instead of just the standard stigma imposed on mothers who produce children out of formal marriage, and how, like, before, the society was kind of sort of dismissive, like those women should not be treated as if they have any rights and their children have no rights, even the right to carry the names of the father who denied them. So this is big change also happening. Big in its impact on the social life, as a social historian. I notice it and I recognize it, but it happens on ordinary life. It's not like a big revolution or a big regime change. So keeping that in mind, I think actually the book, if it appears in Arabic, I would expect actually a productive conversation with my Egyptian colleagues, the scholars in Egypt, and also people who might be interested in reading the book, particularly kind of sort of deconstruct this myth about it was Bank Masr and Talat Harb who built this glorious, successful company, and give the credit actually to workers who built that success.
At a high cost to their safety and to their quality of life and so on.
Absolutely.
I have a question from perhaps a mutual friend. Our friend Hadil Ghunaim is asking, I was wondering if you were able to find out whether certain factors empowered poor women in their conflicts with the state or with other men, whether being a factory worker or a street prostitute or a mother of a protester provided any difference in leverage to outcome. Also, how far have poor women gained or lost from those old times to our current times? So that's, maybe we'll just take the first question. So has one's background or condition or status in society provided leverage when they've had conflicts with the state or with other men?
Shukran, ya Hadil. That's a very multi-layered question. History is never actually linear. It's never moving in a progressive direction or regressive direction. So it is not easy to say what is gained or what is lost generally, but there are episodes and discussion of like wide circumstances and contexts where achievement could happen. But something related to our talk today, which is the challenge of sources and method in writing social history from below. The court cases actually would allow us to, again, it doesn't really always capture the voice of everyone in a fair, transparent way. These records always mediated by the state and prepared to serve state's purposes, not historians. But actually, but it still can help us to understand how each party make their case, to understand their logic, to understand their own understanding of what could be sources of power to enhance their argument or to counter the other party's argument. Like the case of Sabha. Sabha is the bottom of the bottom of the bottom, the margin of the margin of the margin. And she suffered a lot from like every time like she was arrested as a petty thief, she would penalized. She was arrested as a streetwalker, she would be penalized. But she made a case that what she experienced, like she's a person that is very easy from middle class morality to be dismissed and nothing would be listened at, no excuse for whatever. Actually, it's quite the opposite, that her cruel ex-husband would be accepted as the norm or the logical. Of course, he's protecting his own son from having such a terrible mother. But at the court, Sabha managed to make a case that she was actually sexually violated. This is a woman who didn't mind to provide sex work service in the street, which speaks of how like the weakness of her position in general. But when she was stripped naked against her will in a fight in the street, she managed. So what I'm saying, in these cases, you find every party is trying to make their legal argument. And you see how the weak of the weak or the weakest could manage actually to win a legal case or to win an argument, although they couldn't afford a professional lawyer, although they are actually making their legal argument in front of a judge who comes from all gendered and class biases that tend to criminalize the poor, tend to criminalize the poor women. So
what would you say, what helped her win in this case, and what benefited the state in order to actually have her be declared a victim rather than just somebody who's to be dismissed?
Okay, what is the state benefit? It's I find it troubling question. We can ask about the benefit of the regime, for example. But the state, as these kind of complex networks and of individuals, of institutions, each of them could have a certain level of autonomy of what is fair and what is not. So it is not about serving or achieving something. It could be serving what is right, doing what is right, doing what is moral, interpret the law to assert that the state is strong because the state actually uphold the law for everybody equally or not. However, the general or overall agenda that the state or the institutions and individuals of the state embrace most of the time is public order. Having a fight in the street fights and physical abuse for one another or verbal abuse for one another, etc., contradicts the state's goal of having public order. If we talk about benefit of the state as such.
Okay, just following up, how far have poor women gained or lost from those old times to our current times? How would you compare, those, Sabha's time to our times, if you for poor women in Egypt?
That's a very interesting question, and it would require actually the imagination of poets and novelists, and you might be invited, Dr. Khalid, to contribute to this. It's again, every situation has its own context, but what we know as kind of sort of general rule that the poor and the weak, and here poor women are the combination of both, are the biggest losers in capitalist system and currently the neoliberal capitalist global system. So if we talk about how the majority of Egyptian people now are economically suffering from the neoliberal economy and the state withdrawal from social welfare services, basic commitment for living standard guaranteed by as Egypt experienced until 70s, universal free healthcare and free education. Women are the biggest losers, and poor women are the biggest losers. Meanwhile, you find also mercantilist women who embrace what happens, but these who are talking about individuals. So, but it's still to say the losers and the weakers, etc., does not, it should not actually, should not allow us to ignore the agency of people, how people are engaging with harsh realities and inserting changes. I go back to the example of sexual harassment, and one of activists actually shared with me that just having a cell phone on you when you go to police station to report cases of sexual harassment can provide women with better chance to get her her incident reported, because if you film the officer or whoever in the police station, because sometimes you face that, you go to report sexual harassment incident and they have larger issue to deal with, or out of their gender biases, they don't want to deal with that. They actually dismiss it as so what. But if you have the cell phone and film that, would actually made officers say, oh, okay, we don't want to be called upon as you came and we ignored your case. Let us report, let us listen to what you say. So this kind of sort of type of agencies that women leverage, this is, we need to focus on while we actually still documenting how any decline of some sort of loss happening and suffering happening due to global neoliberal capitalism.
All right. We have any questions? Nobody? Questions? I have one more question for you, because I want to go back to your discussion of nostalgia. And are you working on something there, or is that
it is not a research project as such, but this idea actually, I don't deny, obsesses me. Yeah, like always they talk about الزمن الجميل. I discussed it a little bit with how Layla Murad persona was used as a symbol of for everybody to give their narratives, particularly those who talk about the old glorious clean days. So the idea obsesses me because that meta-narrative, how before 1950, and not to say that the July regime or Nasser regime was good, or I'm not Nasserist, it's just to establish. But also, as a historian, I know very well that before 1952 was like the class disparity, the disparity between classes was horrific. Was horrific to the extent that American experts actually who recommended to have land reform, and between those American experts and some Egyptian scholars of late 1940s formulated what became the first land reform after July 52. We're talking about 19, like somehow when you, the famous scene of the Su'i Bash, Adil Imam's persona in Yaqubian building, when he says the fashion arrived in Egypt before Paris and Egypt was cleaner than London. And that it is true, but it was true for like 3% of the population, while actually the majority of people couldn't secure 3 meals a day. Some of them actually suffered from TB, and because they lived in residential places that doesn't qualify to be for human being and whatsoever, they shared the disease with their children and their wives. One of the things actually we know that from that society at the time, the donkey that was the service in the government, like to deliver post, etc., got fed better than the state employer. So people kind of sort of, in their nostalgia and fabricating meta-narrative, how perfect people spoke politely, quietly, and they had this nice red fez on their heads. That was not the Egyptian society. We know from records. Something else about the cosmopolitan, how it was a sign of tolerance, and no, actually having large foreign communities in Egypt during that time was a racist hierarchy imposed by colonialism against Egyptian people. and against Egyptian people's interest that put Egyptian people or the locals in the bottom of that hierarchy.
The Egyptian law didn't apply to a lot of these communities, right? Correct?
No, they left. The situation was a bit complicated because you find also foreigners from all walks of life and classes, but it's still they were more powerful than Egyptians because they could have weaponized their legal privilege over Egyptians in any counter at any time. Don't mention that when an Egyptian lived quietly next to a foreigner, this is not a sign of tolerance. It was imposed actually top down by the colonial regime. So it's like it is nice that we were nice, but I don't think we had much other choices. We here Egyptians.
Okay, well, I don't know if we have any questions, but I think that's it from here. We thank you so much, Hanan. We really appreciate your spending this afternoon with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Metawa. Thank you.